Welcome to Mystery Story. Here we journey into the forgotten shadows of history, where unanswered questions linger, and where the line between truth and legend blurs. Tonight I invite you to step aboard one of the most chilling mysteries in maritime history, a tale of an abandoned ship drifting silently across the Atlantic in 1872. A ship still intact, her cargo untouched, her sails half set, yet with not a single soul left aboard. This is the story of the Mary Celeste, a ghost ship found adrift with no sign of struggle, no trace of her missing crew, and no explanation that has ever fully satisfied the human mind. Even today, more than a century later, the Mary Celeste continues to haunt the imagination. The year was 1872. The world was in the midst of great change. The Industrial Revolution was reshaping nations, the telegraph connected continents, and steamships were beginning to challenge the old supremacy of wind and sail. Yet, in the busy shipping lanes of the Atlantic, the age of sail was far from dead. Cargo ships still relied on canvas and wind, carrying goods and passengers between the old world and the new. Among them was a sturdy brigantine named the Mary Celeste. She was built in Nova Scotia in 1861, originally under the name Amazon. The ship had already lived a troubled life. Her first captain died on her maiden voyage, and she had suffered several accidents at sea. To sailors of the time, ships seemed almost to carry personalities, even curses. And already, whispers surrounded this vessel. By 1872, however, she had been repaired, refitted, and renamed the Mary Celeste, a two-masted brigantine about 100 feet long, weighing just over 280 tons. Not the largest ship, but a strong and capable one, built to weather the unpredictable Atlantic. Her owner and captain was Benjamin Spooner Briggs, a man of reputation and deep faith. Captain Briggs was 37 years old, experienced and respected for his skill and honesty. He was a family man as well, devoted to his wife, Sarah, and their 2 children. For this voyage, he brought along Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. Their 7-year-old son, Arthur, stayed behind with relatives, perhaps too young for such a demanding sea journey. The crew numbered 7 in total, carefully chosen by Briggs. They were described as trustworthy and capable. This was not a ragtag band of drifters, but skilled sailors under the command of a respected captain. The ship's cargo was barrels of denatured alcohol, 1,700 of them, destined for Genoa, Italy. It was a dangerous cargo, highly flammable but not unusual for the time. Carefully packed and stored below deck, it was valuable freight. The Mary Celeste departed New York Harbor on November 7, 1872, bound across the vast Atlantic. On board was a sense of optimism, but also of solemn duty. Captain Briggs even wrote letters to his mother before departure, noting how pleased he was with his ship, how carefully the cargo was stowed, and how confident he felt about the journey. His words carried no foreboding, no hint that this voyage would become one of the greatest maritime enigmas in history. Days turned into weeks as the Mary Celeste pressed eastward across the ocean. Weather reports later indicated there had been rough seas, but nothing extraordinary. Storms were common, and a brigantine like the Mary Celeste could handle them. And yet, somewhere in the watery vastness between New York and the Azores, something happened. Something so strange, so terrifying perhaps, that the entire crew and Captain Briggs, his wife and their little girl, vanished without a trace. The Mary Celeste would be found weeks later, still afloat, her sails ragged, her lifeboat gone and her people vanished. But here, in these early weeks of November, none aboard could have imagined the fate that awaited them. The Atlantic stretched endlessly around them, the winds filled their sails, and the Mary Celeste cut her path across the rolling waves, carrying with her a mystery that would never be solved. On December 5, 1872, the British brigantine Dei Gratia was sailing through the Atlantic, about 400 miles east of the Azores. She too was bound for Europe under the command of Captain David Morehouse, a seasoned and respected mariner. That afternoon, a lookout on the Dei Gratia spotted something unusual on the horizon. A ship appeared, its sails oddly set, moving unsteadily through the waves. It seemed adrift, yet not sinking. As the distance closed, Captain Morehouse raised his spyglass. The vessel was unmistakably a brigantine. Her sails were partially furled, flapping loosely in the wind, and she listed slightly to one side. The ship's path was erratic, as if no hand guided the wheel. Morehouse recognized her. It was the Mary Celeste. Just weeks earlier, he had dined with Captain Briggs in New York, before both ships set out on their journeys. The two captains were acquaintances, perhaps even friends. Morehouse knew Briggs to be a sober, capable man, not one to leave his ship untended, but what he now saw chilled him. The Mary Celeste drifted like a ghost. No signals, no crew on deck, no sound, but the groaning of timbers and the snap of canvas. Morehouse hesitated. To approach an abandoned ship was dangerous. Pirates sometimes set traps. Disease could be aboard. But curiosity and duty compelled him to investigate. He ordered a small boarding party to prepare. First Mate Oliver DeVoe and several sailors rowed across the waves in a small boat, climbing cautiously up the side of the drifting brigantine. As they stepped aboard, silence pressed down around them. The ship was deserted. DeVoe's men searched. The wheel stood unmanned. The compass and charts were in place. The ship's log was still there. The last entry dated November 25th, 10 days earlier. It recorded nothing unusual, simply routine notes about position and weather. Then, suddenly, silence. The crew's personal belongings were found untouched. Captain Briggs's cabin contained clothing, documents, even his wife's, sewing machine and child's toys. There was no sign of hurried departure. No valuables had been stolen. The cargo hold revealed nearly 1,700 barrels of alcohol still intact, though later it would be noted that 9 barrels were empty. But the cargo was not looted. The lifeboat, however, was missing. One crucial clue: the ship's sextant and chronometer were gone, along with some navigational instruments and charts. Perhaps they had been taken aboard the lifeboat. But why? The Mary Celeste was still seaworthy. There was no fire, no catastrophic flooding. The pumps showed only a small amount of water in the bilge. Nothing unusual for a ship at sea. DeVoe and his men felt a rising unease. The ship seemed too quiet. Food still lay in the galley, mid-preparation, as if the crew had left suddenly in the middle of daily life, but left for what reason? The sailors reported their findings back to Captain Morehouse, and so began one of the greatest maritime mysteries. In history, Morehouse made the difficult decision to divide his already short-handed crew and sail the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, where an inquiry would be held. But for those men who boarded the abandoned ship, the memory would never leave them. They had walked the deck of a ghost, a ship stripped not of possessions, but of people. An entire crew, a family, simply gone. And as the Mary Celeste was brought slowly into port, rumors and speculation began to spread like wildfire. On December 13, 1872, the Mary Celeste was brought into the harbor of Gibraltar under tow. Her sails were tattered, her hull weather-beaten, but she floated firmly on the water. The news of her discovery spread quickly, stirring whispers of ghost ships and ill omens. The British authorities opened a formal inquiry. Maritime law required that any ship found abandoned at sea and then brought safely into port must be investigated. The crew of the Dei Gratia hoped for salvage rights, a fair reward for their dangerous effort. But what began as routine soon spiraled into suspicion. The presiding officer of the court was Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General of Gibraltar. Solly Flood was a man with a reputation for stubbornness, a sharp tongue, and a suspicious mind. When he examined the case of the Mary Celeste, he saw more than mystery. He saw possible crime. The official investigation uncovered puzzling details. The ship's condition raised questions. The main hatch was open, though not damaged. Below deck, some of the cargo barrels, 9 in total, were found empty. They had been made of red oak, less airtight than the rest. Alcohol fumes could have escaped. But was this enough to drive an entire crew to abandon ship? The pumps showed signs of being dismantled. Charts and instruments were missing. And yet, the ship itself was still seaworthy. Solly Flood became convinced something darker had occurred. He hinted at foul play. Perhaps the crew of the Dei Gratia had murdered the Mary Celeste's people and staged the discovery. After all, salvage rights could be extremely valuable, but this theory had little evidence. Morehouse was known as a decent captain. His crew had no signs of guilt. The log entries aboard the Dei Gratia showed no irregularities. Another theory suggested mutiny aboard the Mary Celeste. Could Briggs's men have turned against him, murdered the captain, and fled in the lifeboat? Yet again, there was no sign of violence. Cabins were undisturbed. Blood was never found. Solly Flood's suspicions led to a long, contentious inquiry. The Dei Gratia crew waited anxiously, fearing they would lose their reward. For weeks, rumors spread through Gibraltar's taverns and newspapers. Stories twisted into legends. Some claimed the ship was cursed. Others whispered of pirates, sea monsters, or supernatural forces. Finally, after much debate, the court awarded salvage rights, but far less than expected. The implication was clear. Authorities still viewed the case with suspicion. To the men of the Dei Gratia, it felt like an insult. They had risked their lives only to be rewarded with doubt. But to the world beyond Gibraltar, one fact burned brighter than all the rest. The Mary Celeste had sailed into history as a ghost ship, a vessel without a crew, an unanswered question drifting on the ocean of human imagination. And as the investigation closed, the true mystery only deepened. What could have forced Captain Briggs, his wife, their child, and 7 sailors to abandon a seaworthy ship in the middle of the Atlantic? Theories began to multiply, each more chilling than the last. The Mary Celeste was no longer just a ship. It had become a riddle. When the inquiry in Gibraltar failed to deliver answers, the vacuum was quickly filled by speculation. Across Europe and America, newspapers and sailors, scientists and storytellers, all offered their own explanations. Some were rational, others bordered on the fantastic. Yet each added another layer to the legend, the mutiny hypothesis. One of the earliest theories suggested mutiny. Could Briggs's crew have risen up against him, murdered the captain and his family, and escaped in the lifeboat? On paper, it seemed possible. History was filled with tales of sailors turning against their officers. Life at sea was harsh, discipline severe, and tempers easily flared. But in the case of the Mary Celeste, the evidence simply did not fit. The crew chosen by Briggs had been vetted carefully. They were considered steady and loyal. No signs of struggle were found, no bloodstains, no weapons out of place, no cabins ransacked. Even the captain's belongings, including valuables, were untouched. If it was mutiny, it was the strangest in history. An uprising without theft, without violence, and without a trace. The piracy theory. Another possibility was piracy. The 19th century Atlantic was not free from danger. Barbary corsairs and roving bands of sea raiders were known in earlier decades. Could pirates have attacked the Mary Celeste, killed or kidnapped the crew, and left the ship drifting? Again, the evidence argued against it. Pirates rarely left valuables behind, yet nothing was missing. The cargo of alcohol, a fortune at the time, was untouched, and the ship bore no cannon fire scars, no battle damage. If pirates had struck, they had done so with surgical precision and inexplicable restraint. For most investigators, the piracy theory was dismissed. The alcohol fumes theory. The most enduring scientific explanation involves the cargo itself, the 1,700 barrels of denatured alcohol. 9 barrels had been found empty, all constructed of red oak, more porous than the rest. It was suggested that fumes had leaked from these barrels, filling the hold with invisible vapor. To sailors, the smell of alcohol gas could mean only one thing: imminent explosion. Perhaps Captain Briggs, fearing a catastrophic fire, ordered everyone into the lifeboat temporarily, while the ship was vented. In the chaos, the towline may have snapped, leaving the lifeboat adrift and the crew doomed. It was a hauntingly plausible scenario, yet questions lingered. Why abandon a perfectly seaworthy vessel instead of waiting out the fumes? Why take women and a child into an open boat in the vast Atlantic rather than staying aboard? And if Briggs was cautious, would he truly risk everything in such a drastic move? The alcohol theory remains persuasive, but it too cannot silence doubt. The waterspout or rogue wave others looked to nature. Some suggested a waterspout, a towering column of ocean water spiraling into the sky. Such a phenomenon could drench the ship, flooding her suddenly and convincing Briggs she was sinking. In haste, he might have ordered abandonment. Another possibility, a rogue wave. These walls of water, once dismissed as sailors' tales, are now known to be real. A single monstrous wave could have slammed the ship, terrifying her crew. Even if she survived structurally, panic could have driven them into the lifeboat. But the Mary Celeste showed no real damage. Her masts were intact. Her deck had not been shattered. Was nature truly to blame? Or was this just another half-answer? The earthquake at sea, a few speculated about an undersea earthquake, what we now call a seismic sea wave. The ocean floor shifting could release violent tremors, shaking the vessel and spooking the crew. Strange lights, water displacement, and terrifying noise might have convinced Briggs that disaster was imminent. Again, this was conjecture. No solid evidence tied the Mary Celeste to such an event. The paranormal theories. Of course, when reason fails, imagination fills the void. And, in the case of the Mary Celeste, imagination ran wild. Some claimed sea monsters had dragged the crew away. Tales of giant squid or leviathans were common among sailors. Others whispered of a curse, that the ship herself, troubled from the start, carried misfortune that finally consumed her crew. And some, embracing the rising fascination with spiritualism of the Victorian era, suggested ghostly forces, abduction by spirits, or even alien intervention. The Mary Celeste became a canvas on which the supernatural could be painted. These theories, though fantastic, only deepened the ship's legend. For the human mind, the lack of closure often demands the extraordinary, the human element. Perhaps the most chilling explanation is also the simplest: human error. Imagine Briggs, cautious and devout, burdened with responsibility. He sees water in the bilge, perhaps misjudges the amount. He smells alcohol fumes. He fears explosion or sinking. His wife and child are aboard. In that moment, he makes a fateful decision: evacuate. He orders the crew into the lifeboat, planning to stay close until the danger passes. But the tow rope snaps. The sea swallows the boat, and the Mary Celeste sails on without them. It is a tragic scenario, rooted not in mystery, but in a single miscalculation. And yet, without evidence, it remains only speculation. In the Yossi end, every theory leaves gaps. Mutiny leaves no bodies. Pirates leave no theft. Alcohol fumes leave no scorch marks. Nature leaves no damage. And the supernatural leaves us with more questions than answers. The Mary Celeste remains what she was. On the day she was found, a ship without people adrift in the middle of the ocean, carrying silence in her sails. The Mary Celeste sails on in legend. More than a century and a half has passed since she was found drifting empty and silent in the Atlantic. Her hull has long since been lost to the sea, but her story has endured, told and retold in books, newspapers, films, and whispers in sailors' taverns. What makes her so haunting is not merely the absence of a crew, but the absence of answers. Ships sink, crews perish in storms, battles are fought and recorded, But here, in this one strange case, everything remains unresolved. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his devoted wife Sarah, their young daughter Sophia, and 7 capable sailors, gone. Not a body ever found, not a scrap of clothing washed ashore. Only silence. Theories abound, yet none can claim certainty. The Mary Celeste defies explanation, and perhaps that is why she fascinates us still. For in her empty decks and ragged sails, we glimpse the ultimate mystery. The unknowable, the unsolved, the forever uncertain. She is a ghost ship, not because she is haunted by spirits, but because she haunts us, reminding us that the ocean keeps her secrets, and that some questions are never meant to be answered. And so we leave the Mary Celeste where we found her, adrift, timeless, forever carrying her mystery across the waves of history. Thank you for joining us on this voyage into the unknown. If the shadows of the past intrigue you, if unsolved mysteries stir your imagination, then you are in the right place. This is Mystery Story, where history whispers and the unexplained endures. Until next time, keep searching, keep questioning, and never stop wondering what lies just beyond the edge of certainty.